but we're just having a quick 2-minute break, and then we'll get back going. Dylan's joined us as well.
Hi, Dylan.
Hi, Dylan. Great to see you. Hi, Nick. First time I'm meeting you. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks. So we're huge Nick Sousanis fans on MAUX, so we really feel really privileged that you're joining us.
Thanks so much. Yeah. Sorry, I hope I have lots of stuff. I don't feel quite like I've got it all in order, but hopefully, Dylan, you've got it all figured out. No.
As far as I can work out, Dylan always has things figured out.
That's my experience. So, can I take a 1-second test here just to make sure?
Absolutely.
You can see things, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes, looks good.
Just to let you know as well, we have 60 attendees watching us live right now. We're not in a kind of private room or anything. I just
that's fine.
Jump in and warn you.
Well, before we start with the subversion and the expletives.
Exactly. You want to hear what John was saying before.
Dylan, Nick, I want to introduce you to Al, a lecturer on MAUX, co-conspirator, and to Jack, who's been emailing with you. He's been helping us organize this. I have to say, without him, I don't think we'd be doing this at all. The capacity for all that emailing, I'm full up. Hopefully you saw a little bit of that last session, in that we have about 40 to 45 minutes for a discussion between you guys. If there's things you want to show, that's straightforward. We can do that. At the end of that, we'd hand over for a Q&A session. We're also encouraging people maybe to seed the chat with those questions. We'll hand over to Al to moderate that at the end of the session. We are recording, by the way, just wanted to tell everyone that, not just you two. I hope that's okay.
I think we were going to take a format. Nick's going to show some slides, and then I will, and then we'll chat about what we've shown, and then do the questions, if that's okay.
That sounds absolutely perfect. Thank you. So I think we're...
Can I just say to Dylan, just because I just emailed you back, but I have I thought I'd do a couple on the sort of thinking and drawing part, and then stop, and then go to you, and then we could come back to the form side.
Okay, cool.
So I don't go there, I'll just keep going. if we do a little back and forth, I feel.
Okay, that's cool.
Just fly straight into the sun. So we're back, folks. 1601. We like to start as promptly as we possibly can on MAUX. That's how we roll. I want to welcome Dylan Yamada Rice, a teacher, a researcher, a designer. Again, I'll put the bios in the chat so we don't have too much, don't use up too much for their conversation time to do that. And Nick Sousanis, a graphic artist and also a teacher and researcher. Over to you guys.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us. So should I do it, Dylan?
Yeah, you go first.
All right. Here we go. I gotta find the thing. So I'm gonna share screen just for a minute, and then we're gonna take turns with that. So I make comic books. I did comics as scholarship, for those who don't know. And the sort of core of my work is rather than sort of illustration, I do a lot of work as a metaphor. I make narrative through the use of metaphor. And one of the things I think we decided to talk about is how drawing itself can be a form of thinking. And I thought I'd take you through a little bit of this, because I started making comics as my scholarship, as a way of bringing access. But I think what really happened to me along the way is that it became a different way of thinking. And I really see that for myself, and I really see that in my students. And I think, and I'll talk about it in the second time I come on with some slides, but I think comics are this profoundly powerful way to represent our thinking, but I think they're a really powerful way to generate our thinking. And I say this as somebody who works primarily solo, but I think in my drawings, I have this tremendous collaborator. In the act of making marks, I see things in my marks that I don't expect, and that leads me to new directions. And so this is the very first sort of sketch map from Unflattening. And I like to share it a lot. It's reproduced in the back of the book. I like to share it. I mean, it's kind of fun to see the sort of Easter eggs of what I did and what I didn't do. But I think more importantly, it sort of shows the mess of what thinking looks like. And that it's, I think to people who don't make art or don't make music or whatever those things, when you see finished work, you think it sort of came out fully formed. But what really happens, at least in my case, is this mess and this iteration that just keeps going and going until I find something. And so it's much more about a process of discovery. And I think the other reason I like to share this is because this isn't a picture of my thinking. This is it. Without these large sheets of newsprint where I'm making marks and trying to figure things out, the work doesn't happen. It would be a very different product. And I get this question all the time where, do you do the drawings first or the words first? And I always say, not sarcastically, yes, that it's really this back and forth between making them. And I think, it's a really interesting thing that the follow-up to Unflattening is a work that's very much about the act of drawing is thinking. And I found myself stuck for about a year. Like I had all these ideas, I'd done all this reading, and I kept trying to sort of sit there and think myself to a solution. And it really, it took me forever to get to this point where I came back and said, forget it. What am I doing? I got out my big sheets and I just started making marks. And all of a sudden, all the ideas that I'd been working on came together in this sort of 1 hour, sort of crazy brainstorm of things that poured out on the paper. And they were all things I'd been thinking about, but they were sort of stuck in me. So I say that as someone who's like teaches this and believes in it, it's still really hard to trust it. I'd say maybe one other thing is how good I am at drawing badly. I think that's really important. And this is a scene from the new work where I draw on this thing, and you can maybe see it here. It's an axe. It's a double-sided axe where it's just drawn nicely over here. And in drawing it badly, I noticed how much it kind of looked like a lighthouse with the lights coming out of it. And that sort of connected into this scene from the Odyssey where they go by the lighthouse of Pharos. And I was like, oh, that's a perfect thing. And then it connected to all these connections happen, and it connected a lot because I had drawn badly. So I think what I want to close this part with is just saying that, this is a quote from Linda Berry in Motion, You Speak the Language That Language is Based On, that importance of making the marks is really a form of thinking. And, we know this, you know this when you like hop in the shower, go for a run, and ideas happen. But I think that I just want to emphasize that and emphasize how important it has been for me to sort of change what I can know by making sloppy marks and seeing where they take me and seeing what I can learn from them. So yeah, I'm going to stop my share here and hand it over to Dylan. If I can find the button that says that. There it is.
One of the things is really interesting, Nick, just that idea of like messy marks versus perfect marks. And I know as well, John, you're a photographer, an analog photographer. And I think a lot about the role of analog versus digital, which I guess quite a lot of people do. But with drawing as well, how digital can smooth away a lot of that mess. And that can be positive and negative, right? And as the artist in that role, you get to see all that. And the fact that you choose to share some of those things with the audience in itself is interesting. But looking at your slides, one of the things that I picked up was like, oh, I wonder what kind of pen he uses. Because you had your pen in there, a picture of your pen. And for me, I don't know if for you, but I have this pursuit, of like the perfect pen. And some pens make me feel like my drawings are not in my control at all, as they do with writing. And you're sort of forever trying to drag them back across the page. They're too heavy or the nib's too thick or whatever. And other pens are much easier to use for different kinds of marks. So yeah, so I leave that out there, and perhaps you'll pick it up, the pursuit of the perfect pen, the tool, the physical, the digital, I don't know. And if we're going to flip back and forwards between slides, then I'll share a couple now as well. Okay. She'll try to go to full screen, although that might not help me know when to stop. So yeah, so this idea that we saying about drawing and knowing, and I've never done this before, but this is an image of my dad's, and my dad is a painter, and obviously I've known him my entire life. And recently, when people talk about what's the biggest influence of any particular artist on your work, I've realized that it's actually my father, because I've known him my entire life. So I've seen the role that drawing's played in his life, and also how his drawing stroke painting has changed in style, how when he was younger, he would spend a lot of time putting a lot of detail into his work. And as he's got older, he sort of talked about, you know, the speed at which he wants to get stuff out. He wants to get the ideas down and done before, I suppose, before he dies, a bit morbid. But so again, that idea of what gets recorded and what gets shown, and also the piles and piles and piles of stuff that's always around that nobody ever sees. They're just an idea, a notion, a way, exactly as Nick says, of thinking. It doesn't matter about the product, you know, it's the process, and that cliche. And I put this one in because obviously it's the elbow bump of the pandemic. I don't know whether you picked that up, and the mask and so on. And then recently I went to see Flem's work at the Graves Gallery in Sheffield, and he's a street artist, and he usually makes work on a massive scale. And these were teeny tiny pictures the size of a playing card, and it was my mistake that I didn't take my glasses, that I couldn't fully see them. But again, that whole thing, that I was so taken aback by the scale of the work. So this kind of knowing and mark making, the tools, the pens, the change in scale, and also the looking at something in a gallery, or the piles and piles of stuff that, you know, would be in my father's working space, or, you know, the graffiti in the street and something. It completely, I think, affects our way of knowing. So yeah, I don't know if that's the next bit I was going to go on to was was transcription, but I don't know, Nick, if there were things you wanted to pick up in there. Did anything resonate with you? Or
I was going to talk about my dad too, once you prompted it.
Do you have a slide about your dad?
I threw one while you were talking. I dug one up because you said it. I was trying to find one more. Can we switch your screen?
Sharing, so you can share as well? Or...
Yeah, just for a second, and then I'll let you do the next one. How about that?
Yeah, sure.
I have two things. So let me get the slideshow. Sorry. So two things here. One, my pen, I think I stole them first from my dad, just whatever he used. So that's how I found the perfect pen, is I just took it, and now I buy them. And they blow up on airplanes a lot. So I've ruined a lot of clothing, except the last 2 years. I don't know that it's a good pen, but it works for me, because I can't correct it. So whatever sloppiness I draw, it's there, which is quite different than when I draw with a pencil. But so this is my dad's a physics teacher, and this was a paper he did on the origin of the moon back in 1969. And I've been sharing this a lot lately because I teach my students to do sketch noting, and I make my syllabi, I draw my syllabi for them. And I get it a lot where people say, that's great because you do visual medium and you're a comics person. And I say, I actually don't think that's really that relevant. I think it's as relevant for science people. And, and so I show them this, and oops, I had one more in here. Oh, this is actually from his class. This is from his class. Like, they're very sort of Little Prince-esque kind of drawings is where his skills are, and which I really love. I can't do that. But I think I think the role of drawing as a form of thinking in all our thing, it's maybe more obvious when we're doing art, but I think it's as important when you're doing this kind of work. And I wanted to show one more slide in here, and then I'll hand it back to you.
What you just said reminded me that a friend was telling me recently how her daughter is often in trouble at school for drawing in classes, because she cannot think without drawing, because just listening, she feels something innate, you know, in her wanting to, you know, to make a mark and remember it and so on. And, and as adults, it's quite interesting that if you're not in an art school, that's quite often, I don't know if you found that, Nick, maybe not because you're so well known now, but like, if you just start drawing in a meeting, people find it a bit disrespectful. So it's not taken as a standard way. It's sort of seen as you're not engaged. It's not taken as a standard way of thinking or recording.
Right, and I think most of the studies show that it's kind of the opposite, right? I mean, I quiz my students at the beginning, like, how many of you got in trouble for drawing? You know, hands fly up, and yet all the studies now show that like drawing while you're is a way of paying attention. And I think of myself as a mathematics major in undergrad, and you know, the margins in my notebook are filled with you know, filled with whatever I was drawing at the time. And I remember when I ran an arts magazine in Detroit, and I remember interviewing this guy. He did these kind of amazing, like alien robot language drawings, like just intense things. And what it turned out they were his notes in art history courses. No one on earth would ever know that except him, but he could remember everything from his art history course, but with these, you know, like sort of, I don't know the right word, but just these incredibly dense, complicated drawings. So I don't know, that always stayed with me. And I definitely know for myself that I didn't make such complicated drawings, but it's really key. So maybe I'll hand it to you and then we can come back.
Did I stop you from having your?
I had one more about, I can share it. It takes 1 second, but just this thinking is drawing, but just the idea that I think it's really important about the drawing badly is where we draw something where we, you know, if you draw something that looks like the thing, like I draw an apple that looks like an apple, then I see that apple, right? And that's it. That's all that apple's ever going to be. But if I draw something like this sort of squiggle that represents maybe the apple or maybe a bunch of other things, I have the opportunity, even as the drawer of it, even as the person who made it, I have that opportunity to see it in many different ways. And I find this all the time. And I think that, again, to come back to large paper, the reason that's been so key for me is I can start, you know, arrows are a form of thinking, right? Arrows are like, oh, this idea is this idea. And it's just, I don't know, you know, this is all extended cognition and things like that, but I don't know, I have no more to say. I'll hand it to you.
So the next few slides I put together really just to show what a varied role drawing has taken in my research. Yeah, even though the drawing style remains largely the same, the way in which it's used and its intentions become something very different, I think. So I was doing this project in 2015 in the third wave of kind of, can't say third wave anymore without thinking of a pandemic, but I was going to say the third wave of VR coming into the mainstream. I was looking at kids using VR, and obviously you've got that kind of disconnect between what they're seeing in the headset and the real world, so to speak, the physical world. And then there was the movement of the child in that physical space with a child who wasn't in VR there. And it felt like there were all these layers. And in the research project, we were filming it. We could see what they were looking at, you know, on a screen. We did interviews and all of these things. And there was a point at which a child in VR came up and licked one of the researchers' shoes. And I remember thinking, I can't make sense of why that's happened unless I try to sketch out all the things that were happening at the same time. So again, sorry, I feel like I've skipped something. So again, I started to kind of transcribe the kind of movement that children were making. So I was literally just doing screenshots at this point and like tracing them over to make a form of animation. And it allowed me to kind of think, okay, children are moving so fast in VR compared to adults. In the first second, they've gone like 360 degrees and they've jumped up in the air and down on the ground, whereas adults are just kind of getting used to it. So again, later on, it came through, I suppose, in thinking about, rather than transcribing, but thinking, you know, what does this stuff mean? Why did a child lick the shoe, you know? And further on in this research project, I was kind of like, yeah, why is there so much unreal content in Japan compared to these kind of big sort of shoot 'em ups or trips to rainforests or Google Earth VR and so on? So I had this notion, again, because when you draw, you tend to, I suppose, tune into other types of drawing as well. And I had these images in my mind of, you know, famous Japanese artists from the Tokugawa period and various other things in my mind, drawing out these things that were also imagined. And I was kind of thinking, how can I get these things down together, just as a way of thinking about where this cultural difference might have come from. So again, that idea of, it's not something to show, but it was something that would allow me to think through something that felt quite complicated. Yeah, I don't know, is that a natural pause to go back to you, Nick?
It can be. It's really, I mean, I think it's such an important point that you know, that they're not necessarily to show, though I think these are to show as well. But that it helps you figure out where you're going. And I think, I mean, I think about my students, my goal, you know, some of them may go on to be comics makers, but I think all of them go on to understand how to use drawing and comics to do their thinking. And when the time comes, maybe they'll do one that they want to share, maybe not, maybe it's just for them to help figure out themselves. Maybe I'll share.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I have a bunch of stuff I do want to share, but maybe I'll share a student thing real quick.
Oh.
All right. The ping pong back and forth here is tricky. And let's see.
Maybe following on from what people were saying about Zoom being this platform now of working, it would be interesting if it was easier to flip back and forth.
Yeah,
visually,
right.
Rather than just in conversation, because it's designed, isn't it, really, for one person to present and everyone else to listen, or to have a conversation back and forth, as opposed to, yeah, now your image, now my image.
Right, that's the hardest part. You want to have cross conversation. It doesn't work very well. This is a student. This was a few years ago in a class for non-drawers. Basically, I mean, it was an English course on comics before I had my current job. And this is an excerpt from her comic, and she was a non-drawer, and this is her final project. It sort of ended as a non-drawer in a sort of technical sense. But I share this all the time. So if anybody's ever heard me speak, I have shared this little excerpt. But I think what she understood about how to do her thinking in the forum is what blew me away. So you can see, and there's just three sequences here. On the left, there's all these negative words, and sometimes she could feel the weight of the words on her shoulders. And then on the right, there's these positive words emanating from that sun there, and says, "But she is strong." And then here she played with the panel, the play of the page in ways that we talked about in class, and she often led the way in it. And she said, this is a story about a girl who couldn't fit in a box and then laughed from the boxes that fit as she contorted and twisted, unable to find a place. And this, unfortunately, I can never see the top line. So she makes her own box out of words, sounds, and pictures, and soon she learns that there is no need for borders. The boxes restrict her unnecessarily, since she can go anywhere she wishes. So what I just, you know, this is all, it moves me every time I share it, that she really understood that she was dealing in a form that wasn't about drawing skill, but about how we move you and how you experience ideas. And as it turned out, it changed her own experience of herself. I interviewed her for something after. And I think that's so key. And I want to, and maybe I will, sorry. I will go to, I'm going to share a little bit about my process again. So Dylan, if that makes sense. So this is the other side of the things we talked about, the role of layout on meaning. So, you know, I said at the start, I started with thinking about metaphor as a way to generate, as a way to make my meaning. But the other thing that happened is really thinking about the use of the page, not simply images next to pictures, but how the whole page. And just, I won't go into comics theory much, but probably, many people here know Scott McCloud's famous definition: juxtapose pictorial and other images in deliberate sequence. Fist in a box, fist in another box, reader animates, it makes the meaning. And time has to be written in space. And I think here, and I was writing this in something, that this observing events in time and graphically noting them in spatial sequence is like that's humans. Like, that's like, how else do we deal with it? This is a Paleolithic calendar, my redrawing of one from 30,000 years ago. Like, how do you make sense of the change in the moon? You make sense of it in space because you can't make sense of it in time. So comics do that sequence thing, but the other part, and this is sort of the heart of my comics, is, despite the fact we read left to right, top to bottom, the way we read, we also take in all of it at once because it's visual. It's a visual thing. So we make connections across the page in multiple directions, and even within a single panel. So you see the spider web, and then you notice I wrote web-like, and you keep going back and forth between, some people read the words first, some people read images first, some people take in the page first. There's all these different strategies. So comics really shatter the sort of hierarchy of reading. And that, I think, the sort of the static and flat nature of them is really key, because you care about both individual drawings and you care about the meta drawing, the whole, and because you can make all these other nonlinear connections kind of the way you make nonlinear connections in your head. We don't just move through things sequentially in our heads. We've got all these ideas off to the side. So you can do weird things with comics, like this little guy that's trying to get the fruit and he can't get it, he can't get it, he can't get it. So he walks up the page, and then, he does this thing that's only, that's only possible in comics. Or things like Marc-Antoine Mateu's. If I showed you, this is about the Louvre, if I showed you the 9 separate panels, you'd understand most of it, but you'd miss the triangle or pyramid that goes through the whole page, this sort of simultaneous image. So comics are operating at multiple levels at once. They don't have to, right? You could do it very slideshowy, but they can. And for me, that became a thing. How do I get the idea in the very shape of the page? So like, this is from the chapter on ruts and unflattening. And I could have said, I contrasted my wife's commute, which was unusual and different every day, versus the typical commuter who goes out and back, out and back. And I could have said, here's one and here's the other, right? I could have set them next to each other. But instead I was like, how can the page do that? And so in the background, there's the typical commute, the 16 grid that just sort of beats in the background, boom, boom, boom. And it does the same thing, and it actually gets darker, and there's a few other things it does. But on the front, her commute, I've mapped it out onto Manhattan where we live. And it sort of drifts across the way that I thought her drifting, like a leaf would fall, but the way that she sort of encountered the city. So on one hand, it's a fairly simple page for me, but on the other hand, it's taking advantage of how to use the structure of the page to make its meaning. This is a piece I did for the Boston Globe, and I was talking about this entropy and the things that go against entropy. So, entropy is omelets don't turn back into eggs, your clothes won't pick themselves up, coffee grows cold, right? That's a very linear thing, but I wanted to talk about life, these moments there where they go against that flow. And I wanted the page to do it. And so what ultimately happens, and I'll show you how I got there in a second, is so you read linearly, and you get here, and the shape of this, the shape of this yet sort of says, let's go over here. And then all of a sudden we're going to read down, which is still kind of normal, but then the shapes and the directions of the panels say, let's read right to left, and let's read bottom to top before we get shunted back off and read the other way. So yes, comics can put words and pictures together and all those other kinds of possibilities, but they also really challenge what it means to read. And I think the reason I showed my students work first is because I think her inspiration of how she made us like turn and turn and turn to get her experience is really key, and can get at some ideas that maybe we can't get in other forms. So in my case, while I make really complicated drawings, the really complicated part is figuring out how to move you. And so this, and I have this on my website, I have like 50 notebook pages before I like finalized what I was doing on this. And I'm trying all these things. I'm like, oh, I could do grids, and I can have this thing run behind it. And, and I knew some things, and finally I get here, and you can see like, I get it. I get what I'm going to do. And then there's still a ton of work to do, but like now I've got something to organize those ideas around. And then now I get what I'm trying to say. And I think that's really key too, coming back to our opening thing, is at least in my case, I seldom know what I want to say. I know what I'm sort of curious about, but it's not until I make this play with bad drawings and ideas and this additional constraint, how are they going to read? How is the reader going to experience an idea? And maybe, you know, some ideas, so this is from there, this is my sort of take on one paragraph from Ulysses by James Joyce, this thing about where the water flows from when you turn on a tap. That was the only thing that really stuck with me from that book. But like, so the page flows, and I have to do all these tricks with the visuals to say, let's snake through the page. And because that's what the page is talking about. It's talking about how the water comes to us through all these different ways. This one, and I have slides on how I made this if we come back to that. But this is about stories, and it's referencing Scheherazad's Knight's Tale. You know, I wanted it to move like her name. How does her name move? And so there's panels within it, zooms within zooms. What does her name feel like? And that's what it felt like to me. And I think this is the final one with, oh yeah, this would be the final one here. You know, looking at a kaleidoscopic view, I didn't want to center, but I wanted it circular, and you know, so this is one that doesn't actually ask you to read it in a sequential way. This says we're going to abandon that, but it's clear enough that you abandon that. So I'll stop my share here, and I have a few more things if it seems like I should come to them, but I'm happy not to.
I think it leads quite nicely to the kind of one of the points I was going to say, which is because you talk about layout. Is I'm often thinking about what if layout goes beyond the page and drawings are materialized in different ways. So you bring different materials other than drawing to the drawings. And because this is slightly topical of the moment with the strikes going on at the moment, I wanted to also share another huge influence, accidental influence, I suppose, on my own work as well, which is the work of Peter Kennard. So again, he's very famous for photo montages that were used in protests. And I had never, ever thought of him as an artist. But in my childhood, I grew up with parents who took part in a lot of protests. And we had his posters up in my house. I would see them around at protests on boards and so on. One day after work in London, I happened to go to Foyle's bookshop, and there was an exhibition of his work, and he was described as an artist. This was only like 3 years ago, I should say. And I was like, no way, it is art. And I was completely taken aback of these things that had formed the kind of materials of being a child in a family that protested a lot, were flat, you know, in a gallery. They weren't littered around, you know, marches and protest marches or so on and so on. And again, you know, these are the drawings that I've been doing in protest for the strike. And thinking about what do they then become if they are printed out and handed out at the picket line, or what if they're thrown off in my dreams off the top of the university building and scattered down below and so on. So some of these ideas as well come from this really nice exhibition called Disobedient Objects that were at the V&A, I think in 2014 or 2015. Again, so these are not necessarily drawings, straight drawings, but I think they are ways of thinking. So the photo montages of Peter Kennard's work, I would say, is a very similar way of shuffling things around a page and thinking through drawing as the processes that I use as well. But you then get them off the page and out into the real world in a format that's very different, perhaps, from a standard comic book. And what does that mean, again, for materializing experience? So, yeah, that was kind of the last thought I had on this topic. I don't know, Nick, if it resonates with you. Have you thought about taking your drawings off the page in any way? Have you done that? Or
I mean, I give them away a lot, but I don't know about off the page as much. But I think the power of comics to reach people is, you know, I have lots to say about that. Yeah, I don't know.
And I guess obviously comics started, didn't they, as something that was considered not art,
Right.
but was considered as pop culture. So they would have been always, you know, more cheap to disseminate or given away and those kind of things. It's only very recently, isn't it, that we use the term graphic novel to show it as something more worthy and so on.
Right. But I think the form, I mean, you know, to come back what I said about like making sense of time in a spatial way, like that is just inherently human, right? Like we, you know, that's what a calendar is, right? Like calendar is a simple version of it, but that is what a calendar is. And so a graphic calendar, I'm not saying comics are graphic calendars, but I'm just saying that way of how do we make sense of all the, you know, there's too much stuff, right? There's too much for us to keep track of, but we can keep track of it in some kind of spatialized way. So yeah, I don't know. Sorry, not sure where to take that, but.
How are we doing for time? Do we want to stop for questions or do you want us to carry on?
Happy to stop for questions if you guys think that would be a good idea. Open it up a bit.
Yeah, you can. I mean, I could do one constraint-based thing, or I can move to questions. What's your?
Let's have one more.
Go for it. Great. Let's have one more bit.
Go for it.
All right. I don't. Just didn't dovetail neatly. That's all. Let's see.
Although I suppose
I'll do two things. Go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say that, you know, keeping it on a page or taking it off a page and into a protest is in itself a constraint. They're all constraints, aren't they?
Right.
I was making the dovetail link for you there.
Thank you. I needed it. I need a big piece of paper to do it. I mentioned the Scheherazade page. I'll go quickly through this one, but I think what it really represented for me is how drawing can take you places you don't expect. And I knew very early that I wanted to do something with her stories because it just seemed like the kind of image I would like drawing. This is one of the few things that's probably in the beginning and does show up in the book. But I had, as I said, this sort of constraint. It's going to look or feel kind of like her name as it moves across the page, and it's going to zoom in from image to image. But when I got to the middle of it, what I wanted to talk about, because this is about the power of stories, I wanted to say by stories, I don't simply mean you know, like the fanciful or the fantastic, but I also mean things like science as a kind of story. And I think as a writer, I might have just said that and put a period and been done. As an illustrator, I might have said that and put a picture of Einstein or something, right? But as this person who's trying to navigate the constraints of the form and the constraints of the sort of metaphors leading the way, I had to find something in science that spoke to that. And I specifically wanted to find something that came from the time the Knight's Tales were written down and in the place the Knight's Tales were written down. So I spent a ton of time sort of researching what was going on in the sort of Arab Golden Age then. And I stumbled on some work by a man named Al-Tusi, whose work was picked up 300 years later by Copernicus to make his revolutionary work. And I already had this page about Copernicus early in the book. And I was like, oh, that's perfect. And so it took quite a while to do what is a very tiny piece of the book, to understand the sort of science behind it, to be able to re-share it, and then work through the constraints of my page. Ultimately, for what's this little corner right here, I can blow that up. It's this like 3 or 4 panels. So what's important in that idea for me is that nothing in my notes, in my outline, in perspective says you should understand a bit of obscure Arab astronomy from the 1300s. Nothing. There's no reason I should do it, except the art says you've got problems to solve, and somehow you've got to get through this. And if you don't, you've got to find something. So the constraints. I'm going to jump to one other set here. Oh, this happens to be the next slide. That was easy. I was, when I had my postdoc, I was at University of Calgary, where the conceptual Canadian poet Christian Book was. And Christian is famous for this book Eunoia that uses only a single vowel per chapter. It's pretty astonishing thing. But what he said, we had a conversation, and he said, it's not really following this constraint that's the hard part. It's not having enough constraints. And he said, because him finding single, words with only A in it was a challenge, but not the big challenge. The big challenge is also making the right kind of meter and the right kind of poetic imagery and all the other constraints that he was trying to manifest. And I think for me, like having enough of those constraints and then trusting that I'll find a way through them, finding a way to sort of find my way free, always generates exciting things. And I'm just going to close this from the new work. I decided that I would have a chapter with all sort of circular compositions. So this is sort of the ideas of what I'm going to talk about. And it doesn't matter that and I think you can see it up at the top. Can you guys, I don't have any way to, oops. Anyway, then I get to this. So this is it. So these are all, and I did a bunch of, I found all the comics pages that use circles. And I tried to say, how do my ideas, what kinds of circular compositions do they work with? And, so that's my organizing principle, which I haven't really done it that way. And this is the page in process. So this is the upper, this is this right here. And, like it does the things I wanted it to do, but it came from sort of building this box that I had to find my way out of. And I think that's relevant to the things we're talking about. So I'm gonna stop the share there, and mostly because I happened to finished it last night, so I am eager.
Well done on finishing something. No mean feat with drawing either, is it?
Oh no, yeah, it's spent 2 years on the last chapter, so we'll see.
2 years on a chapter?
Well, I've got 2 very small children and a pandemic. They don't leave until recently, don't leave the house at all. So
I was going to say Proust. Dylan, how's your schedule? I think you need to.
I've got 10 minutes.
You got 10 minutes. Okay,
yeah.
Perfect. That's great. That's great timing for us. So that was just so wonderful, and the way that you improvised that sharing, I thought was really lovely. I spent the weekend with my dad, funnily enough. No drawings involved. Al, over to you maybe to moderate a Q&A session. Does that sound okay?
Perfect. And yes, agreed. Thank you so much. First of all, we have a question from Alex Newson. When drawing a comic book, do you have an idea of the environment the person will be reading the comic book in? And how do you think this relationship between comic and environment shapes the reading experience?
Wow, what an interesting question. I don't, and by environment, do you mean the literal environment, or do I mean like, is this person a student? Is this like what's meant by that?
I don't know if Alex, I'm not sure if you're able to speak. You could pop something in the chat, but my interpretation of that would be, and given the course and the way we operate, it might be thinking about the kind of environment that the person is in. Are they likely to be in a cafe or a bedroom or an office or a
That's I've never thought about that. Not once until this minute. So I think it's a great question. I like it a lot. I don't know. Dylan, can you answer that question? I've never thought about such a thing. Thank you, Alex. Sorry, I have no answer.
I think this proves that maybe we're all selfish, because I never think about anyone except for myself when I'm drawing. I draw it for me. It's if it's a way of thinking, it's for me, but I'm not intending to publish it in the way that you are, Nick. And I don't know if when you did in unflattening, whether you always intended to publish it, or because obviously it's a PhD thesis and so on, or if you're thinking changes once you've published one thing and you're going to do a second thing, because I don't have that. That's not anything I've in my experience. So for me, I mean, as far as I've got is, what happens if I get it off the page and into a kind of makeshift audience through flyers or whatever. But not in terms of a book format.
Yeah, I mean, I thought there's things I knew a year before I finished Unflattening that it was being published. I'd signed something already. So I was aware of that, but I didn't, I will say the things I think about in the new one, like I have more control over, like I showed you guys spreads. I had some spreads in the book, but they were, I had to have the margins around the page. Like I didn't have control, like it all had to be one-sided paper, right? So the book isn't like that, which means there's some weird things that didn't happen correctly when it got turned into a book. So this one I can think about from the ground up. And I definitely thought about my readers, but not where they were. That's so interesting. I thought about who are the kind of people who would read it. And I think that's important, but I'm now going to start thinking about where they read it. Thanks, Alex.
So I have a question adding to Alex's, if I can cheekily do that, which is, so where when it leaves your hands, where do you imagine the work is? Where does the drawing go in the world?
Is that to Nick?
That's to either of us.
You go first.
I know where it goes. It moves from one side of my desk to the other. Or it goes behind me on this shelf. You can see it all piled up. Actually, that's not entirely true, because I'm also aware that I'll share stuff on social media as well. And I think particularly more recently, I've been influenced a lot by this Japanese style of telling a short story in 4 panels called yonkoma. And I guess that's a constraint as well, but also it happens that those 4 panels are probably just about as much that Twitter can cope with as well. So yeah, so when I'm putting things out on social media, I'm like, will this get me sacked? Or will I be able to survive another day and feed the family? So I'm aware of my audience in that sense, and where it's going. But in terms of a lot of the stuff I draw, it literally just floats around me, not going anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, I think making the first one, I had hopes for a certain kind of audience. Like I had hopes for future teachers and undergrads and academics and beyond that. I had hopes for that, but not real expectations of that. But I was, I'll say, I just found one the other day. I was talking about giving away things earlier. So I would, every time I gave a talk, every time I would bring little book, this is a little miniature of the work. And I've probably given away several thousand of these. And I give them away at talks and stuff, but I would give them away if I was in a cab and somebody asked me what I do. If I was at a restaurant, if I was talking to a parent or whatever, I just give them away. And partly it's because I have this funny conversation with parents on our playgrounds and stuff. They find out what I do and they're like, oh, who's your characters? Who do they fight? What are the, and I'm like, they don't really fight anyone. There's not really any characters. So, but I don't think anybody can, what's that?
No capes.
No. And I like, I still read superhero comics. So it's not an anti that, it's just, they aren't there, but I don't think people can wrap their heads around, you're even people who are sort of like into comics, their expectations are pretty narrow. They're pretty narrow of what they can be. So, for me, like I've had to hand it to people to educate them about what it is they do. But it does surprise me. I mean, I have high schools that read it, and I've had little kids. It's always surprising. And then I have business people. I've been on some business podcasts and things where like it's an investor show. I'm like, apparently, it wasn't intended for that, but it was also, I'm curious. I mean, I'll say back to the metaphor thing. My goal with that was to make something that you didn't quite know what I was talking about, which I realize can be a problem because it makes it a little more complicated, but it means if you're interested in finding a way in, you can find your own way in. So you might think it applies to your field, even though I don't even know what your field, I don't even understand your field at all, which happens to me where people ask me questions very specific to their field and I have no idea what they're talking about. And, but they do. So I'm thrilled with that. If it's useful to someone else, that's the best you can do.
Thank you. We have a question from Dan Lockton, which was, do you have any tips for other PhDs wanting to try to use the format of the dissertation itself as a kind of materialization of the argument? Would you have done anything differently?
Yeah, and I posted a link that I've compiled to Dan of other dissertations and things using alternative formats. I mean, I think it's easier now. I mean, I think you know, I get a lot of questions about how I got away with it. I think I got away with it partly by being an older student, partly by being stubborn, and partly by really ignorance. Like, I just didn't know it was something you weren't supposed to do. So I just went ahead and did it. So I think that's helpful. My advice to people doing it is to seek outside help. Like, the fact that I did a dissertation in New York City really helped me because I could meet cartoonists, and, you know, I spent as much time with the comics community as I did with the academic community. And I don't think you can count on, you know, I think this is not a criticism of academics, but I think if you can draw something that sort of looks like you can draw something, it's likely to be if they're open to it, they're going to say, oh, you're great, you can draw, you know, like, there's not, the bar for that is a little different. So I wanted to have something that the comics people were equally on board with as the academics. So I think so seeking the sort of outside input is, to me, really helpful. And I think the job, especially if it's a form that hasn't been done, I mean, I think if you're doing comics now, I'm an advisor to someone doing more than one person, but one who's about to defend a dissertation in comics form. I think, you know, there's examples now to point to, right? So that, I think in comics, it's fairly simple at this point. But I think part of your job is to educate your committee, right? I mean, and so my first days as a doctoral student, I was making comics that demonstrated it, and I was doing research on comics that showed why they do the things they do. And I think if you come in as a performative dancer or whatever, I think there are ways to do it, but part of that is educating, most of that is educating your committee, I would think. Maybe Dylan, you have a different take on that, but.
Really quickly, I think I've got about 1 minute left.
Oh,
it was
sorry.
Just to say that when your comic first came out, I remember I think I was just finishing my PhD, and there was a real interest, like a flurry of interest of like presenting, you know, PhDs in a different way. And I remember, like, as a student rep or something, having to go to all these meetings about whether work could be presented in a different way. And the answer was always like, nah. So, but again, I wasn't in art at that point in time, but I remember thinking, oh, it's interesting, like you said, that the constraints were so tight at that time that, yeah, it was in these endless meetings of people being like, no, don't do that. Just write it, draw it later, but write it now. So yeah.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Dylan. I know you have to. I know you
I'm
have to go.
really
You're probably
sorry.
itching off your seat.
I have to go and do research work from now.
Go do it, Dylan. Can I respond to that? Or, I mean,
Dylan, just thanks so much for being
Thanks
with us.
very
Dylan.
much.
See
Thank
you.
you, everyone.
Nick, thanks a lot too. I submitted all my interim PhD exams in visual format.
Oh,
Yeah, and got away with it.
fantastic.
Luckily. Nick, thanks so much for giving us your time
Yeah.
today. You know, this notion of the importance of drawing, it's really easy to overlook, I think. And you know, as I said before, we're really big fans of Unflattening on MAUX. It's a required reading.
Oh, thank you.
Alongside a lot of the other people that have spoken today, actually.
Yeah.
So I know things are kind of complicated in your house with your kids and everything. So really grateful for your time.
Yeah, well, I'm really grateful to be here. Thank you all, and thank you all the people I can't see. And if I didn't answer a question, you can tag me or something, and I'll do my best.
You don't know what you're asking. You don't know what you're saying, Nick. We will tag the hell out of it.
I said I'll do my best. It's not always that good these days, but anyway, thank you guys so much.
Thanks so much. thanks to everyone also who's paid attention and stayed with us the whole afternoon. You know, whether fully alert and making comments or on in the background, you know, your presence is greatly appreciated. We do have an amazing lineup tomorrow as well. It's going to be incredible. So please do come back. Dan, thanks so much. Mushon, thank you. Laura, thanks. Maya, thanks so much.